With every passing day, every event on the calendar hurdles Alex towards hysteria and his own doom. Welcome to our channel, where we write fascinating tales of people, places, and values. Be sure to like and subscribe so that we can continue creating stories like these. Alex Winters had never liked cleaning. It was a tedious, thankless task, and it always seemed to uncover things better left forgotten. But when Alex's grandmother passed away, the responsibility fell squarely on his shoulders. The old woman's house was a labyrinth of memories: stacked bookshelves, dusty furniture, and endless piles of papers and knickknacks that spoke to decades of hoarding. It was in the attic, hidden beneath an old quilt, that Alex found the calendar. At first glance, it didn't seem remarkable. Its cover was made of thick, yellowed paper with no discernible design beyond a faint embossed border. The year printed across the top in elegant serif font read 1953, even though the calendar itself appeared untouched by time. Intrigued by its pristine condition, Alex flipped through the pages. The calendar was unusual. The first few months had neat handwriting in the boxes, listing mundane events. Dentist appointment, 3 p.m. on February 14th. Grocery shopping on March 3rd. Mary's birthday on April 22nd. The handwriting grew sparse as the months progressed, and by June, the boxes were entirely blank. Alex assumed it was unfinished, the kind of thing someone starts enthusiastically but abandons halfway through the year. But what truly caught Alex's attention was the current date. January 5th. The box was blank until Alex touched it. As his fingers brushed the page, the surface felt unnaturally warm, almost pulsing. The sensation was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Alex wondering if he had imagined it. But when he looked back down, the box for January 6th was no longer empty. Written in the same neat handwriting were the words, "Stub your toe on the way to work." Alex frowned. He didn't have a job. Not anymore, anyway. He'd been laid off 3 weeks ago from the diner, a victim of budget cuts and dwindling clientele. It seemed absurd that an old calendar could predict something as specific as a stubbed toe. But he shrugged it off, chalking it up to a prank or his own overactive imagination. Still, a part of him was unsettled. Alex decided to take the calendar home, mostly out of curiosity. The attic was suffocatingly hot, and he was eager to get back to his apartment, where he could pore over the mysterious artifact in comfort. The next morning, Alex awoke groggy and irritable. He had stayed up too late researching antique calendars, but his search yielded nothing useful. As he shuffled toward the bathroom, he struck his foot against the leg of the coffee table. A sharp pain shot through his toe, and he let out a string of curses, hopping on one foot. It wasn't until he sat down to nurse his injury that he remembered the calendar. His heart skipped a beat. Stub your toe on the way to work. It had been spot on, except for the part about work. Coincidence, Alex muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He hobbled over to where the calendar lay on his kitchen counter and flipped to January 7th. The box was blank, but as he watched, ink began to seep into the page, forming another prediction. Receive an unexpected visitor. Alex didn't know what to make of it. He spent the day on edge, peeking through the curtains every time a shadow passed by the window. By evening, he was convinced the calendar was some sort of elaborate hoax. He decided to toss it out, but as he reached for it, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Startled, Alex froze. No one ever visited him unannounced, not even his neighbors. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Gathering his courage, he opened the door. A man in his late 40s stood on the threshold, clutching a stack of flyers. "Good evening," he said, flashing a tired smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for my dog. She ran off this morning, and I've been going door to door hoping someone's seen her." Relief flooded through Alex. just a harmless stranger. He took a flyer and promised to keep an eye out for the dog, a scruffy terrier named Lucy. As he closed the door, he glanced back at the calendar. The prediction had been right again. But what did it mean? Why was it happening? And more importantly, what would it predict next? Over the next few days, the predictions continued. January 8th. Lose your keys. Alex searched for hours before finding them in the fridge. January 9th. Break a glass. A tumbler shattered in his hands as he did the dishes. January 10th. Get a paper cut. A mail flyer did the honors. Each event was minor but disturbingly precise. It wasn't until January 12th that the calendar upped the ante. The prediction read, "Witness an accident." Alex avoided leaving the house that day, hoping to escape the grim forecast. But as he watched the evening news, his heart sank. A car crash on a nearby street had left 2 injured. It was becoming clear that the calendar's predictions weren't just coincidence. And as Alex turned to look at the next blank box, he felt a shiver of dread. The calendar was waiting for him, its empty squares promising more than he could ever be prepared for. By January 13th, Alex's fascination had turned to obsession. He began cataloging the predictions, comparing them to his daily experiences. The more he investigated, the more questions arose. Was the calendar predicting his actions, or was he subconsciously fulfilling its prophecies? And if the predictions kept escalating, what horrors awaited in the weeks to come? The answers, Alex realized, lay buried in the mysterious artifact itself. He resolved to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Alex's initial fascination with the calendar had shifted into a gnawing unease. The strange predictions, once mild inconveniences, had started creeping toward something more sinister. By January 15th, the calendar's entries felt like an ominous whisper in the back of his mind, controlling his life in ways he couldn't comprehend. It began with the prediction for January 14th, lose something valuable. Alex had spent the entire day on edge, guarding his wallet, phone, and the few sentimental trinkets he owned. Despite his best efforts, nothing seemed to go wrong. He began to hope, for the first time since finding the cursed artifact, that the prediction would fail. But when he reached home that evening, his heart sank. The calendar itself was missing. The realization hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He tore through the apartment, searching every corner, but the calendar was gone. Had someone broken in and taken it? Or had it somehow vanished on its own? He couldn't shake the feeling that losing the calendar was part of its game. But why? As he slumped onto the couch, defeated, Alex felt a sharp jab in his thigh. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a folded scrap of paper. It wasn't his. Unfolding it, he saw the same familiar handwriting. January 15th. You will find me again. Alex stared at the note, hands trembling. The calendar wasn't just predicting events. It was toying with him. The next morning, Alex woke to a knock at the door. His stomach churned as he opened it to find a package lying on the doormat. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and unmarked. He hesitated, a cold dread washing over him, but curiosity won out. Peeling back the paper revealed the calendar, perfectly intact and eerily pristine. As Alex held it, a chill ran up his spine. The date for January 16th had already filled itself in, "You will try to destroy me." Determined to break free from the calendar's grip, Alex decided to test its prediction. That afternoon, he carried it to an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town, armed with a lighter and a can of gasoline. He placed the calendar in the center of a makeshift fire pit, doused it, and lit a match. The flames roared to life, consuming the pages in seconds. Alex watched, a sense of triumph swelling within him. But as the fire burned out, his victory was short-lived. When he approached the smoldering ashes, the calendar lay there, untouched and unscathed. It was as though the fire had bent around it, leaving its surface pristine. Panicking, Alex tried ripping the pages out, but the paper resisted, as if glued together by some invisible force. He tried soaking it in water, burying it in the dirt, even leaving it in the freezer overnight. Nothing worked. The calendar remained indestructible, a constant reminder of its control. The prediction had been right. Alex had tried to destroy it and failed. By January 17th, the calendar's predictions had taken on a new tone, one that seemed to mock Alex's resistance. Feel the weight of futility. He spent the day in a haze of frustration and despair, unable to think of anything but the calendar. Hear your own voice betray you. A phone call with a friend ended in an argument Alex hadn't meant to start, his words twisting into venom as if guided by some unseen force. See the first crack. That night, the mirror in his bathroom fractured without warning, the splintered glass reflecting his fear-stricken face. The calendar wasn't just predicting events. It was shaping them, manipulating Alex's actions and the world around them. It was alive and it was feeding off his fear. Alex decided to confide in someone, desperate for a way to break free. He visited his friend Rachel, a historian and amateur occult enthusiast. Rachel listened intently as Alex recounted the events of the past 2 weeks, her brow furrowing deeper with each word. "You're sure you didn't hallucinate any of this?" Rachel asked, examining the calendar. "I'm not crazy," Alex snapped. "You don't understand. It's not just predicting things. It's making them happen." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, let's assume it's real. Objects like this, they usually come with rules, some kind of logic. We just have to figure out what they are." Alex's hope flickered. "You think you can help me?" "I'll try," Rachel said. "But if this thing is as powerful as you say, we might be dealing with something dangerous." The two spent hours researching cursed artifacts and occult phenomena, but answers were scarce. Most of what they found was vague or speculative, offering little in the way of practical solutions. Still, Rachel's presence was a comfort, grounding Alex amidst the chaos. By the time Alex returned home that night, he felt a glimmer of optimism. But as he placed the calendar back on the counter, he noticed the entry for January 18th had already appeared. "Lose the only person who believes you." Alex's heart sank. He called Rachel immediately, but the line went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, growing more frantic with each unanswered call. Finally, he drove to her house, only to find it dark and empty. The next morning, Alex received a call from the police. Rachel had been in a car accident the previous night. She was alive but in critical condition, unconscious and unresponsive. The calendar had won again. Alex's world crumbled. He couldn't escape the calendar's grip, couldn't outsmart its predictions. Every attempt to resist only seemed to strengthen its hold, tightening the noose around his life. By January 19th, Alex had given up trying to destroy it. Instead, he began writing down the predictions, cataloging each event in meticulous detail. If he couldn't stop it, he could at least try to understand it. But as he stared at the blank square for January 20th, waiting for the next entry to appear, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the calendar wasn't predicting the future? What if it was creating it? By January 20th, Alex had become a prisoner of his own fear. The calendar's predictions, once unsettling but manageable, now loomed over his life like a storm cloud. Every morning, Alex would wake up, dread coiling in his stomach, and check the calendar for the next prophecy. And every day, the predictions grew darker. The entry for January 20th read, "You will see a life taken." Alex couldn't shake the ominous weight of those words. He debated staying home all day, locking the doors, and avoiding any interaction with the outside world. But deep down, Alex knew it wouldn't matter. The calendar's predictions were unavoidable. That afternoon, Alex ventured out cautiously, walking to the corner store for supplies. He scanned his surroundings obsessively, expecting catastrophe around every corner. But the trip was uneventful. It wasn't until he was walking home that he noticed a commotion on the other side of the street. A stray dog had darted into traffic, and a man was chasing after it. Time seemed to slow as Alex watched, powerless to intervene. The man lunged for the dog just as a speeding car careened around the corner. The impact was deafening. The man's body crumpled to the pavement, lifeless. Alex froze, heart pounding. The scene was surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Bystanders screamed and rushed to the man's aid, but it was too late. The calendar's prediction had come true. When Alex finally tore his gaze away and stumbled home, he couldn't stop shaking. The vivid image of the man's death replayed in his mind, a grim reminder of the calendar's power. The entries that followed plunged Alex deeper into despair. January 21st. You will harm someone you care about. Alex avoided all contact with friends and family, terrified of what he might do. But an accidental email to a colleague cost them an important opportunity they had promised to share. January 22nd. You will lose control. That day, Alex experienced a sudden, inexplicable blackout while driving. When he came to, his car was parked haphazardly on the shoulder of the highway, miraculously unscathed but surrounded by confused drivers. January 23rd. You will feel the cold breath of death. Alex woke in the middle of the night to an icy draft sweeping through his bedroom. The windows were closed, the heater running, yet the air felt freezing. Shadows danced unnaturally on the walls, and Alex swore he heard faint whispers. The calendar wasn't just predicting events anymore. It was tearing Alex's life apart piece by piece, each prophecy designed to break him. By the end of the week, Alex's paranoia had reached a fever pitch. He started noticing patterns in the predictions, connections that seemed too deliberate to be coincidence. The calendar wasn't random. It was orchestrating a narrative, one that was driving Alex toward an inevitable conclusion. The entry for January 24th confirmed Alex's worst fears. You will bring suffering to someone innocent. Alex tried to stay inside all day, but a persistent knock at the door shattered his resolve. A young girl, no older than 8, stood on the stoop, holding a clipboard. She was selling cookies for a school fundraiser, her bright smile a stark contrast to Alex's fraying nerves. Alex's first instinct was to slam the door, but the girl's hopeful expression stopped him. He couldn't bring himself to be cruel, so he reluctantly bought a box. As the girl turned to leave, Alex noticed her shoelace was untied. Wait, Alex said, stepping outside. Your shoe. Before he could finish, the girl tripped on the loose lace and fell down the short flight of stairs. She landed hard, crying out in pain. Her mother, who had been waiting in the car, rushed over, glaring at Alex as though it were his fault. Alex tried to explain, but his words felt hollow. The guilt was overwhelming. The calendar had been right again. He had brought suffering to someone innocent. The predictions continued to escalate. By January 27th, Alex couldn't leave the house without fear of causing harm. Even staying home offered little solace, as the calendar's prophecies seeped into every corner of his life. Each new entry was a fresh wound, cutting deeper than the last. When January 28th arrived, Alex was greeted by a chilling message. You will meet your end soon. The words sent Alex spiraling. He spent the day pacing, racked with anxiety. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. Was the calendar predicting his death, or was it warning of something worse? In a desperate attempt to break free, Alex decided to consult an expert. He found a reclusive scholar named Dr. Evelyn Mercer, an occult historian who specialized in cursed objects. It took hours of convincing, but Dr. Mercer finally agreed to meet. When Alex showed her the calendar, Dr. Mercer's face paled. Where did you get this? She demanded, her voice shaking. Alex explained everything. The attic, the predictions, the escalating horrors. Dr. Mercer listened intently, her expression growing more grave with each detail. "This isn't just a cursed object," she said finally. "It's a conduit. Something or someone is using it to manipulate reality. And if the predictions are growing darker, it means they're gaining power." Alex's stomach dropped. "How do I stop it?" Dr. Mercer hesitated. "Destroying it won't work. Objects like this are bound by rules, and breaking them usually comes at a cost. If we're going to sever its influence, we need to find out who created it and why." Dr. Mercer's words offered a sliver of hope, but Alex knew the road ahead would be dangerous. The calendar wasn't just an artifact. It was a weapon, wielded by something far beyond his understanding. And with each passing day, its grip on his life tightened, dragging him closer to an unspeakable fate. The entry for January 29th filled in as Alex watched. "You will uncover the truth." By January 29th, Alex's life had become a waking nightmare. The calendar's predictions were no longer abstract warnings or eerie coincidences. They were precise orchestrations, manipulating his actions and the world around him. Yet, despite the chaos, the promise of uncovering the truth gave Alex a fragile thread of hope. That day, Alex returned to Dr. Mercer's office, the calendar clutched tightly under his arm. Dr. Mercer had spent the previous night scouring her archives, trying to piece together the origins of the artifact. When Alex arrived, the historian greeted him with a mixture of urgency and dread. "I found something," she said, ushering Alex inside. "It's not much, but it's a start." Dr. Mercer laid out an old, brittle journal on her desk. The pages were filled with faded handwriting, but one passage stood out, underlined in crimson ink. "The keeper's clock marks the fate of the bearer. Time bends to its will, and the cost of resistance is chaos." "The keeper's clock?" Alex asked, frowning. Dr. Mercer nodded. "It's an old legend, one that predates written history. Supposedly, certain artifacts, clocks, calendars, hourglasses, were imbued with the power to manipulate time and events. But they're not just tools, they're traps. Whoever possesses one becomes a pawn in a larger game." Alex's grip tightened on the calendar. "So how do I win this game?" Dr. Mercer hesitated. "The only way to break the artifact's hold is to disrupt its flow. Skip a day. Ignore its prediction. But it's risky. The journal warns that skipping a day amplifies the chaos tenfold." Alex's heart sank. The calendar had already caused so much destruction. Could he risk making it worse? But the alternative was to remain a prisoner, bound to its sinister will. That night, Alex made his decision. He would ignore the calendar for January 30th, no matter the consequences. He unplugged his clocks, turned off his phone, and barricaded himself in the apartment. If he could just survive one day without giving in, maybe he could break the cycle. When he woke the next morning, Alex avoided the calendar entirely. He didn't even glance at it as he shuffled past the kitchen counter. The day stretched on in tense silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside felt like a warning. But Alex stayed resolute. He wouldn't give the calendar the satisfaction. By midnight, Alex allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He had done it. He had broken the pattern. But his victory was short-lived. The morning of January 31st began with an unnatural stillness. The air felt heavy, the kind of oppressive quiet that precedes a storm. Alex finally mustered the courage to check the calendar, and his blood ran cold. The box for January 31st was filled with frantic, overlapping handwriting, as if the calendar had been scribbled on by dozens of hands. The words were chaotic, fragmented. "You broke the chain. The keeper is angry. Prepare for judgment." The predictions spilled out of the box, bleeding into the margins, the ink dripping off the page like fresh blood. Alex backed away, heart pounding. He had expected retaliation, but this was something else entirely. The chaos began immediately. The lights in Alex's apartment flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. A deafening hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until Alex's ears felt like they might burst. Shadows began to move unnaturally, stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that clawed at the walls. Then came the whispers. They started faint, barely audible, but soon grew into a cacophony of overlapping voices. Some were angry, others pleading, and all of them were directed at Alex. "Why did you resist? You had no right. The Keeper's wrath will consume you." Alex clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices only grew louder, invading his mind like a swarm of locusts. The room felt like it was collapsing around him, the walls distorting and closing in. Desperate, Alex grabbed the calendar and ran. He burst out of the apartment and into the night, the whispers chasing him like a storm. The city streets were eerily empty, the usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alex didn't stop running until he reached Dr. Mercer's house. He banged on the door, frantic and breathless. When the historian opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to horror. "What did you do?" she demanded, pulling Alex inside. "I skipped a day," Alex gasped. "I thought it would break the cycle. But now everything is falling apart." Dr. Mercer's face paled. "Skipping a day doesn't break the cycle. It shatters it. The artifact doesn't just predict events. It creates a timeline, one that must be followed. By skipping a day, you've unraveled the threads of that timeline." "So what happens now?" Alex asked, dread pooling in his stomach. Dr. Mercer hesitated, then said softly, "The Keeper will come for you." The first sign of the Keeper's arrival was the cold. A bone-deep chill filled the room, frosting the windows and turning each breath into a cloud of mist. The whispers returned, louder and more coherent, forming a single unified voice that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. "You cannot defy fate," it intoned. "The price must be paid." Alex and Dr. Mercer barely had time to react before the shadows in the room coalesced into a towering figure. The Keeper was humanoid but impossibly tall, its elongated limbs draped in tattered black robes. Its face was a blank void, a swirling abyss that seemed to pull at Alex's very soul. "You have disrupted the balance," the Keeper said, its voice resonating like the toll of a funeral bell. "You will answer for your defiance." Alex tried to run, but the Keeper moved with inhuman speed, blocking his path. Its elongated fingers stretched toward him, and Alex felt an overwhelming force pin him to the ground. Dr. Mercer shouted something, her voice distant and muffled, but Alex couldn't make out the words. The Keeper loomed over him, its void-like face inches from Alex's. "Your time is not your own," it whispered. "You belong to me now." With a final, ear-splitting roar, the world dissolved into darkness. When Alex awoke, he was back in his apartment, the calendar lying open on the counter. The date was February 1st, and the box was blank. But Alex knew better. The Keeper had not let him off. February 1st marked a grim milestone for Alex. He had defied the calendar, confronted the Keeper, and survived, but only just. His body bore no physical injuries, yet his mind felt fractured, haunted by the whispers and the shadowy figure that had almost claimed him. The calendar's blank square for the day felt like a reprieve, but Alex knew better than to trust it. It was the calm before the storm. Determined to find answers, Alex returned to Dr. Mercer. Despite the older woman's stoic demeanor, Alex could see the exhaustion etched into her face. The events of the previous night had left his mark on her as well. "We have to end this," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I can't live like this anymore." Dr. Mercer nodded. "Then we'll need to dig deeper." The journal hinted at the origins of the Keeper's artifacts, but it didn't give us the full picture. "I have a few leads, but pursuing them will be dangerous." I don't care, Alex said firmly. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. Dr. Mercer spent the next several hours gathering materials. She produced ancient texts, maps, and photographs of artifacts similar to Alex's calendar. Each one was accompanied by stories of tragedy and ruin. A farmer whose clock brought drought to his village, a merchant whose hourglass drained the life from everyone around him, a nobleman whose sundial summoned eternal night. These artifacts all share one thing in common, Dr. Mercer explained. They were created by the same entity, a sorcerer known only as the Keeper. According to legend, the Keeper was obsessed with controlling time and fate. They crafted these objects as tools to manipulate the world, but their power came at a cost. Each artifact was bound to a curse, feeding on the lives of those who used them. Alex shivered. Why would anyone create something like this? Dr. Mercer hesitated. Power, revenge, madness. The accounts vary, but one thing is clear. The Keeper's creations were never meant to help anyone. They were weapons designed to ensnare and destroy. So how do I stop it? Alex asked. How do I break the curse? Dr. Mercer's expression darkened. There's only one way. You have to sever the calendar's connection to the Keeper. And to do that, we need to find its anchor point. The anchor point, Dr. Mercer explained, was the source of the calendar's power. It could be an object, a place, or even a person, something tied to the artifact's creation. Destroying the anchor would weaken the calendar enough to break its hold, but finding it would be no small task. Do you know where to start looking? Alex asked. Dr. Mercer pointed to a faded map pinned to the wall. It showed a remote village nestled deep in the mountains. This is where the journal's author claimed to have encountered the Keeper's artifacts. If the anchor exists anywhere, it's there. The journey to the village was grueling. Alex and Dr. Mercer traveled by car, then train, and finally on foot, trekking through snow-covered trails that wound through the forest. The deeper they ventured, the more isolated they felt. The air grew colder, the trees more twisted, as if the very land was under the Keeper's influence. When they finally reached the village, it was nearly dusk. The settlement was small, with only a handful of houses clustered around a crumbling church. The villagers watched Alex and Dr. Mercer with wary eyes, their faces gaunt and pale. This place feels wrong, Alex murmured. Dr. Mercer nodded. Stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. The pair approached an elderly woman sitting on the church steps, her gnarled hands clutching a rosary. When Alex explained their purpose, the woman's eyes widened in fear. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. The Keeper's curse has plagued this village for generations. Those who seek to challenge it rarely return. We don't have a choice, Alex said. Do you know where we can find the anchor point? The woman hesitated, then pointed to the church. Beneath the altar. But beware. It's protected. The church's interior was cold and silent, the air thick with the scent of decay. Alex and Dr. Mercer descended a narrow staircase hidden behind the altar, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. At the bottom, they found a chamber carved into the rock, its walls lined with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift under the light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small, blackened clock. Its hands moved erratically, ticking faster and slower as if defying time itself. That must be it, Dr. Mercer said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Keeper's anchor. Alex stepped forward, but the moment he touched the clock, the chamber trembled. Shadows pooled around the pedestal, coalescing into the familiar form of the Keeper. Its void-like face regarded Alex with cold disdain. You dare defy me again? It intoned, its voice shaking the very walls. This will be your end. The Keeper attacked with a wave of darkness, its tendrils lashing out like living shadows. Alex and Dr. Mercer dodged, narrowly avoiding the strikes. Dr. Mercer shouted instructions, her voice urgent. Destroy the clock. It's the only way. Alex grabbed a nearby rock and swung it at the clock with all his strength. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, shattering the clock into pieces. The keeper let out an unearthly scream, its form dissolving into a storm of black mist. As the shadows dissipated, the chamber grew still. The oppressive weight that had hung over the village lifted, and Alex felt a strange sense of peace. He had severed the calendar's connection to the keeper. When Alex and Dr. Mercer emerged from the church, the villagers were waiting. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and awe, as if a great burden had been lifted. "Is it over?" Alex asked. Dr. Mercer nodded. "For now. But artifacts like the calendar have a way of resurfacing. The keeper's influence may be weakened, but it's not gone." Alex looked down at the shattered remains of the clock in his hands. He had won a battle, but the war against the keeper's curse was far from over. Returning home from the village, Alex felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. The destruction of the clock had severed the calendar's connection to the keeper, or so Dr. Mercer believed. Yet, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The calendar, though quiet, sat ominously on his kitchen counter, its pristine pages blank for the first time since its discovery. Dr. Mercer's parting words echoed in Alex's mind. "Be vigilant. Artifacts like these are never truly gone. If the keeper's influence remains, it may find another way to reclaim what it lost." February 2nd came and went without incident. For the first time in weeks, Alex allowed himself to hope. The calendar remained untouched, its pages devoid of predictions. Alex began to reclaim his life, venturing outside, reconnecting with friends, and trying to rebuild the sense of normalcy that had been shattered. But on the night of February 5th, Alex awoke to a chilling sight. The calendar, which he had moved to a drawer, was now sitting on his bedside table. Its once empty square for February 6th had filled in. "You must choose." The words haunted Alex throughout the day. What choice? And why now, after the clock had been destroyed? He tried to ignore it, but as the hours passed, the unease grew unbearable. By evening, Alex was staring at the calendar, willing it to reveal more. As midnight approached, the calendar's surface began to shimmer, the paper rippling like water. The writing in the square for February 6th shifted, forming a new message. "Pass me on, or take my place." The realization hit Alex like a blow. The calendar wasn't done with him. Severing its connection to the keeper had weakened it, but the artifact still sought a host, someone to carry its curse. And now it was giving Alex a choice. Relinquish it to someone else or bear the burden forever. Alex's first instinct was revulsion. Passing the calendar to another person meant condemning them to the same torment. It was unthinkable. But the alternative, living with the artifact's curse for the rest of his life, was equally horrifying. For hours, Alex wrestled with the decision. He thought about his friends, his family, and even strangers on the street. Who would he choose? Could he even bring himself to make such a choice? The moral weight of the decision felt crushing. By dawn, Alex had made up his mind. He would destroy the calendar once and for all, even if it meant risking everything. Dr. Mercer had warned him that destroying the artifact outright might unleash unforeseen consequences. But Alex was willing to take that risk. Anything was better than perpetuating the cycle. Alex gathered the calendar and drove to an abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town. He brought gasoline, a sledgehammer, and matches, determined to leave no trace of the artifact. As he prepared to destroy it, the calendar's pages began to flutter, though there was no wind. The words in the square shifted again, forming a final plea. "You cannot destroy me. Choose or face oblivion." Alex hesitated, but only for a moment. With a defiant yell, he doused the calendar in gasoline and struck a match. The flames roared to life, consuming the artifact in a blaze of heat and light. For a brief moment, Alex felt a surge of triumph. But the flames didn't last. As the fire died down, the calendar lay untouched, its pages unscorched. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and more oppressive. Shadows began to coalesce around the quarry, and Alex knew the keeper was coming. The keeper emerged from the darkness, its towering form more menacing than before. Its void-like face stared down at Alex, and its voice rang out, shaking the earth beneath his feet. "You cannot escape fate," it intoned. "The cycle must continue." Alex stood his ground, clutching the sledgehammer. "No, I won't let you use me. I won't let you hurt anyone else." The keeper's form flickered, its presence growing unstable. "You defy the inevitable," it said. "Choose or be consumed." In that moment, Alex realized the truth. The calendar wasn't just a cursed artifact. It was a conduit for the keeper's power, a way to extend its influence into the world. Destroying it wouldn't just sever the curse. It would weaken the keeper itself. But doing so would come at a cost. Alex felt the pull of the artifact, the keeper's will pressing down on him like a crushing weight. "You can't control me," Alex said through gritted teeth. "This ends now." With all his strength, he swung the sledgehammer down on the calendar. The impact sent a shockwave through the quarry, the ground splitting open as a blinding light erupted from the artifact. The keeper let out a deafening roar, its form unraveling into tendrils of shadow that dissipated into the sky. When the light faded, Alex was alone. The calendar was gone, reduced to ashes that blew away on the wind. The oppressive weight that had haunted him for weeks was lifted, leaving a profound silence in its wake. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex felt free. In the days that followed, Alex tried to move on, though the memories of the ordeal lingered. He visited Dr. Mercer to share what had happened, and the historian listened with a mixture of awe and relief. "You did what no one else could," she said. "The keeper's hold on this world has been broken. But remember, artifacts like the calendar have a way of resurfacing. If it ever returns, someone else may have to face the same choice you did." Alex nodded, the weight of those words settling over him. He had won, but the battle against the keeper's influence was far from over. For now, though, he could rest, knowing he had done everything in his power to break the cycle. And as he walked away from Dr. Mercer's office, Alex couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see the calendar waiting for him. But the street was empty, and the world was quiet. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Again, if you enjoyed the story, make sure to like and subscribe, and share this video with your friends.